Today, it is time for server maintenance, and this is going to be a very in-depth one. So if you haven't seen any of my previous server videos, I would encourage you to watch them to see how this thing has evolved, but I'm going to be getting into every single part of it today, so if I'm honest, you really don't need to. Because I need to take out every single part of this thing today, because we're going to be upgrading a lot of key components. First off, we're going to be putting in a couple more sticks of RAM that'll max it out at 128 gigs. But we're not putting the RAM in that motherboard. We're putting it in this motherboard, which is an identical super micro, I want to say X9 DRD IF. Don't quote me on that. And the reason is, the one that is in there now was sent to me some time ago, but it came with shipping damage, and the onboard IPMI, which is the remote management interface, was broken. And it's caused a few problems. This board, though, is identical and should have a functional IPMI, and was also sent to me by the person who sent the original board, Cody. And I'm extremely thankful for that, because that's going to be really nice to have that working. He also sent in the 2 additional sticks of memory that will max it out, and that is a very critical upgrade that we're going to be doing today. But that's just half of what we're doing, because the other half is $200 worth of Noctua fans, because I don't know if you can tell, this thing is loud, and I want to see if I can make it not loud, because I have to replace the fans, and if I'm going to do that, I might as well really do it. So today, we're going to try and make the server completely functional and totally silent. Now, I'm really curious how the fans are going to work out in this thing, because I have this connected to my main desktop over 10 gigabit, but I have 2 ports, and I'm only using one of them. If this is quiet enough that I can tolerate being next to it while editing, I would really like to bond both ports together and have a 20 gigabit connection to the server. I can't really use that because I don't have any 20 gigabit drives, but it would be nice to know that the bandwidth to multiple drive pools, because I have a lot of drives in this thing, wouldn't be bottlenecked in any way by the network interface. So I want to try doing that, but also it would just be nice to not have to have this crammed into the server closet that I normally have it in, because that really is inconvenient to do any kind of maintenance on this thing. So if I can move it into somewhere more accessible in my desk, that would be really handy. Now, as part of that, I want to compare the volume of the server before and after the fan replacement. And you might think that I could use something like a volume measurement app on my phone, except I can't. You cannot do that with anything other than an iPhone, and it's not because Apple has some kind of fancy audio processing, it's because Android phones all have different microphones, and there's no way to calibrate the software to the exact microphone that's in them, so it's just not possible. It could provide, potentially, some kind of relative measurement, but I can do the same thing by just plotting the waveform unedited at the bottom of the video here, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave my microphone, which I have slightly off frame, set to the same volume level when I measure the server, and I'm going to place it in multiple spots around the chassis just to get a baseline reading of how it is now. Then, once we've done all of the hardware replacements, I'll put the microphone back in the same position at the same volume setting, and we'll compare. That should give me just as much information as one of these inaccurate apps will, but it's going to be a little bit easier to show because I'll be able to just plot the waveform. So that is how we're going to do that. Now, you likely noticed in here I have a GPU, and that's not because I'm doing Bitcoin mining or something. I'm running a GUI because I render videos on my server, at least I used to. The version of Resolve I'm using is no longer compatible with this setup for some reason. So one of the things I want to do today is try and fix that. So this has just been sitting in here idling, basically, recently, and I really want to get it back into action. But we'll be reinstalling the entire operating system today to make that happen, so that's going to be a whole other fun thing. Now, the reason I have to replace the fans is because the bearings in this one have gone bad. If I try and spin it here, it will not continue on, but the other ones that are right next to it from the same time will. It's really hard to spin. There's a big metal grate here. So if this fan is bad, all three of these fans are likely going to go, as well as the other two in the rear that came with this case when I bought it. This is a Norco chassis, and you can't really get this anymore, it seems. So I'm lucky I got it when I did. It was used, and I don't know how long it was in use, so I don't really know what the lifetime is of those fans. So I figure one went bad, the other two probably going to go bad soon, so I might as well replace the lot. Now, unfortunately, in order to realistically remove those fans, I have to remove this divider, which has holes in it that all of the cables are running through, which means that I have to undo every single bit of wiring in this thing in order to get those out. I could get to the screws from the back, but I still have to remove the two CPU coolers, the power supply, and the graphics card to do that, and if I'm going to all that effort, I may as well remove it anyway, and I still have to remove the motherboard, so realistically, there's no reason not to just remove it to do this, because I have to get so far in there anyway that it's not going to save me any work. So I do need to make some notes here as I go along, because the drives are all connected to, I think we have the motherboard and then two different HBAs in here, and I need to make sure that the drives stay connected to the HBAs that they are connected to, because at least one of these has a really dumb thing where when you connect new drives to it, you have to initialize them, quote unquote, which wipes them. So I need to make sure that I connect all the drives back to all the same HBAs so that everything is happy and I don't lose any data. So that's going to be fun. Back here we can also see two other fans. These are 80mm fans that I'm going to replace. These haven't shown any signs of going bad, but just look at them. That giant hub motor and the thickness, yeah, those are really loud. I also want to attempt to replace these fans. Now, these are really new. These came on the CPU coolers when I bought them, when I first got this server. And I'm going to be just kind of slapping the Noctua fans that I bought onto these. The front one will mount pretty cleanly, but the one on the back's not going to be great. I kind of wish that I had bought the Noctua coolers that are available for this thing. I don't know if I knew that they were available and just wasn't willing to pay for it when I first put it together, but I kind of wish I did now. It doesn't matter though. They'll mount cleanly to the front. It's just the back that's going to be an issue. Elsewise, I think these might actually be better coolers. The actual heat sinks, it's just that the Noctua fans are more in line with what I would really like to have in this thing in the long run. So, I think it's time to start tearing this thing apart. This is not going to be fun. But it will be nice to completely rerun all the cables in here, because it is a little bit of a mess. As a refresher from the other videos, this graphics card is connected through this riser cable. This had to be done because this is the only 16x slot on the whole board. So I didn't really have a lot of options. And obviously the card itself is longer than the space that it has there. So it couldn't physically fit because of the CPUs. So I'm running this extension over to the part of the case that the motherboard doesn't actually use. And then I have it mounted on some standoffs back here to raise it up above the motherboard. It barely fits, but it does. And even though it's right up against the side of the case, it has never had any cooling issues at all. I don't know if it's because the case mostly flows through or what, but it's been totally solid. So as weird and horrible as the setup looks, it's been flawless. So I can't really say much more about it than that. But now I'm going to go ahead and pull it all apart. I'm probably going to rearrange some of the cards here, especially the 10 gigabit card I would like to put here, so it's in the open airflow area, because that's the card that gets the hottest, and then it has some heat sinks poking out, and then it won't be up against another card. It'll have more area against the riser cable. So I am not as concerned about which cards go back to where, because that shouldn't matter, but I'm going to leave all of the cables connected, so I know which cables go to which parts of the bays up front, and then I don't have to try and match those back to the HBAs later. I might go ahead and label them though, just to be on the safe side once they're out, but I don't think I'm going to need to worry about that. So let's go ahead and start getting all of this out now. And now finally, oh, come on. There we go. Okay, so this is my problematic motherboard. You can sort of see in this area that the serial port is bent inwards, and then this vinyl tape is actually blocking a USB firmware programming header that was sheared off. And on the new one, which I'll bring over in a moment, we can see that it's actually a really robust connector, so that took some effort to break off. I couldn't really tell any more damage. I think maybe the VGA port, yeah, the VGA port is knocked back as well, but that's really hard to see. So this thing did have some unfortunate damage in shipping, but thankfully the new one is in much better condition. The only minor thing I can see is probably not shipping damage. There's a little bit of a break on one of the SATA ports, but that's nothing. So let me get that one over here as well, and then we can start transferring parts over. All right, I'm hoping here this video didn't just take an unfortunate turn. When I was setting up the server, I was trying to find a mouse and a keyboard to plug into it, and I noticed that the board didn't have PS2. And thought, oh, I thought it did. Okay, so I went and grabbed USB peripherals. Well, I'd looked at this board and saw, yeah, no PS2. But this one does. This is an X9 DRD IF, and this is an X9 DRD IF. So I'm guessing these are different revisions of the board, and now I need to go do some research to make sure that I'm not going to run into any problems here. Most likely not, but I just want to make sure that there's nothing waiting for me here that might be an issue, like CPU compatibility or needing to update the BIOS or something. So, alright, it's probably fine. Everything looks like identical. The only real difference I'm seeing is that some of the capacitors are from a different series. So I think I'm going to be fine. But that's unexpected. So yeah, let me go do some research. Probably all good. Just want to make sure. Okay, well, as far as I can tell from research, there is absolutely no difference. They just stopped putting the PS2 port on at some point. They're both labeled revision 1.02 up there, so they should be fully compatible. I don't understand why they dropped the PS2 port, but whatever, that's fine. So I'm going to go ahead and start working on migrating the parts over to here, and then we'll test fire it. And I have the power supply over here still. I'm not going to put it back in the chassis for that. The VGA port should be functional on this one. It's not on that one because that's one of the casualties of the unfortunate shipping damage. So hopefully I'll put the CPUs in there and the RAM and it will just fire right up. So let's go ahead and get started on that. All right, I'm gonna go get some wipes and clean those up, and then transfer them. All right, that should be good to go. Go get myself clean, and then transfer. Okay, I've got the new sockets ready to go. I took a look at all the pins just to make sure that they're good, and I'm pretty sure everything's fine. So let's go ahead and start the transfer process. Now, these are Xeon E5 2690 CPUs. These are socket 2011. These are technically socket 2011 narrow, but that only changes what cooler mount options you have. Moved over. I always like to check my fingers, make sure I don't have thermal paste on them after touching them when they are previously installed chips, just to be sure. But okay, there we go. I do not have blinking slots for this, so this one will be going into this bag now, and that should be it. Now let's go ahead and get the RAM populated now. It's going to be really easy to know which slots to populate because it's all of them now. There we go. That's 128 gigs of RAM. That is awesome. Okay. Coolers. I'm a little conflicted about this. So I bought 4 of the Noctua fans to put on here. All right. Yep, that's good. I'm not sure how I can mount them to the back though. So I want to explore that a little bit here before I mount them, because while they're out and movable will be the easiest time. These boxes are ridiculous, so let me play around with that for a bit. Okay, it took a bit of trial and error, but I did come up with a way, and it was using twist ties. So I got both of these mounted like this. So first off, the front one obviously just snaps onto there. Comes off a little easier than I would like, but it's probably going to be fine. This thing never moves, so it's not really a concern. The backside fan, there's just no way to mount it cleanly. So I ran some longer twist ties through the fins at the top and then to the nearby mounting point, and then I needed to make sure that it mounted flush along the bottom, and I couldn't get through here because these are kind of crushed on the bottom. I don't know why, but the fins on the bottom are too close together, so it wouldn't work. So I ran from the heat pipe to the outside one, so I didn't add extra depth there. So it should form a good seal along here, and it does it on both. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Oh, cool. I have to put these on while it's on the board. Awesome. Okay, I was not expecting that. Well, that's just lovely. Okay, I guess the next step is to get these mounted on then, since I now have to do that to put the fans on. So I'm going to do one more cleaning since I've had my hands all over these to make sure there's no oils or anything, and then I will do a thermal paste application and install the coolers. From here, things started to take a frustrating turn. I lost track of how many times I actually mounted and remounted the coolers because of different issues, so we're just going to fly through here to the first problem I ran into. So... oh, okay. Huh. Uh-oh. Adding the extra fans on the back of the coolers made the one near the cards too long to fit any of them anymore. But I could at least flip the cooler around and get just enough free space to make it work. Okay, there, it's fixed. There's enough room there now for cards, so... oh man, let's go ahead and get it set up so I can test posting it. That's a good sound. Ah, yes! But... that's a sound. The motherboard was giving a thermal warning as soon as the system was turning on. That shouldn't be possible with any heat sinks on the CPUs, but I decided to redo the thermal paste one more time just to be sure. But it still gave me the warning beep, so I figured it might be the chipset heating up without air flowing over the board. So I grabbed the fan divider and got to work on getting the new industrial Noctua fans installed. I put them in the best possible way to reduce noise by using the rubber isolation mounts I had left over from the CPU fans. It was a bit more work, but it can make a huge difference not having them solidly mounted to the chassis for reverberation. After getting that set up and trying it again, I had the same problem and tried to investigate it further with the system on. What is the deal with that beep? That is weird. Okay, so I have it booted off of a flash drive right now just to test and make sure that it's not CPU temps that's making it cry. But it's fine. There it goes again. Nothing's wrong. Why? Alright, so you can hear that thing off beeping in the background. I'm logged into the remote admin. I'm running Core LM sensors on it. You can actually see what the temperatures are here. The CPU is 38 degrees C and 44 C, so it's running fine. But the weird thing is, if I go over to the sensor readings, the board itself can't get the CPU temps. That's why it's complaining so much. So I'm working with the person who sent me this right now to figure out what on earth is going on here, because this is super weird. Some explanation is needed here. The fans on this board are not controlled by the chipset or operating system. They're controlled by the IPMI system, which is basically an entire middle management computer built into the motherboard. For better or worse, it watches the CPU temperatures directly and adjusts the fans based on different profiles. This control was more direct than I thought it was before I started this project, and led to some unexpected issues later, but for now, I needed to figure out how to get IPMI to see the CPU temps so it knew the computer wasn't melting all the time. After getting some more help from Cody who sent the board, I had an idea on how to fix it. Okay, apparently I need to go into maintenance, factory default, and then restore here. Alright, let's see what happens. Oh, fan speed just ramped down. Whoa, that's so quiet now. Oh man, I know you can't see it. I can start recording. I'm gonna do that. Okay. So you guys have a camera view. I'm actually not sitting at the computer. I'm at my desk. Okay. They're ramping back down. Alright, let's try again here. Okay. Excellent. We're going to continue. Are the fans stopped over there? I think it's in some kind of bad PID loop. And it mostly was. It defaulted to the optimal fan profile, which changes the speed more, and once I was able to set it to one of the other options, it stabilized out. The CPU temps were now also readable by IPMI, and the thermal warnings were gone! This finally gave me a chance to play around with remote management features that I hadn't been able to use on the previous board. Okay, back over here, because this is actually working now. No more horrendous loud beeps. I'm pretty much ready to be able to put this back into the server chassis, but I thought I'd show this off, because it's finally working. This is one of the main reason that Cody, who sent me the motherboard, was so kind to send me another one. IPMI, which is Supermicro's remote management interface, is now working, and there's an app for my phone that allows me to go ahead and control everything from here, which is so nice. There's also a web interface. That's what I was just showing you with the screen capture. Now I gotta remember how to use this. There we go. So, what I can do is I can control the fans from here, for example. I can set it to crazy, high-end, actually. Let's set it to full here. That'll ramp up more. Perfect. As I mentioned, this board does not have dynamic fan control, so it doesn't manage like the fan speed compared to the CPU temps. It's just not how a server board operates. They want like a specific amount of cooling or not. I think it's possible from Linux to set more granular controls of the fans using some magic bytes to specific registers or whatever. It's been a while since I've looked into it, but I'm pretty sure you can. And I know there's been some projects trying to do it. I haven't looked into them too much, so I'm not sure, but it's probably going to be worth it to try it because the low speed on these fans is really great. That didn't work out like I thought it would, but I'll come back to that later. I was still excited to see the remote management working so well that I forgot to address the next steps I'll be taking here. Now that the board had proven to work and I had fixed the issues with it, I was ready to put the rest of the fans in the case and start reassembling it. I had high hopes when I first took the system apart that it would go back together more cleanly, but there really isn't any way to well route the cables in this chassis. Just getting them out of the way of the air is as good as it gets. For the next few days after this, though, I ran into more problems relating to the fans that threw a pretty large wrench into my initial plans for this project. Coffee is a delicious narrative device for showing the passage of time. I mean, hello, it's been a few days, and obviously the server is working now. That took a little bit of effort. Now, the fans. So, here's the thing. It's on, and it's not that loud, but it's slightly warm, and I have to decide what the trade-off is going to be. So at this moment, it's running. Everything is acceptable, but on the high end of acceptable, and it could not be. So this server is weird when it comes to fans. It does not have a configurable fan profile, and the way that it regulates the fan speed in relation to the temperature is kind of an on or off situation. So this server has, I'm going to just simplify it to say, has 3 fan profiles. They should have more, and it should be a little more complicated, but this board is kind of strange. I'll get into that in a moment. So this is the standard fan profile. Now, as I mentioned, IPMI actually works, which is the remote management interface. So I'm going to change this stuff from my phone over an app, which is awesome. And we can see how it works here. So this is standard, which is about 30% speed at idle, and then when it gets hot, it'll ramp up the fans to, I think, 100% if it needs to. There is a intermediary, I'm gonna say, mode called heavy IO speed, which should split the fans between 30 and 75%, but doesn't. Again, I'll get into that. And here's what that sounds like. Now, for a server running at a higher fan setting, that's actually pretty good. I don't think I could just sit here having a conversation without having my ears bleed and trying to run away from this screaming. So it's really not that bad, but this is kind of what it takes to keep it at temperatures I would like. Although not quite. I'll get into that in a moment. There is one other fan speed that's just full blast, and I'll go ahead and set it to it now. No real change. So here's the thing. This full speed here is more than enough. It'll actually drop the temps really fast in there. And that would be fine, and I might end up running it at that if I give up and stuff it back in the server closet, which is probably what's going to happen. But it should be possible to set the fan speeds more intelligently. I just can't figure out how. So the server, or Supermicro boards in general, are supposed to have, at least for this series, which is X8, X9, and X10, 2 fan zones, one for the CPU and one for peripherals. The peripheral fans are supposed to be, or is it the CPU fans, are supposed to be designated with letters, and the peripheral fans are supposed to be designated with numbers. This board only has numbered fan headers. There is no fan header A and B in here. So everything is just in one zone. Now, this is important because if I had been able to get different zones, working. I might have been able to move the fans around using extensions and splitters and stuff, and got the fans that are running the hard drives, or cooling the hard drives, which are the parts that are overheating the most, to run a little bit higher with one of the different settings, but not everything else, and it may not have been as loud. But because everything is on one zone, my options are 30%, 75%, and 100%. And the difference between 75% and 100% is just non-existent. So really it's 30%, which is too low, or 100%. I would really, really like to be able to test 50%, but I can't. Now, there is supposedly a way of adjusting the fan speed over IPMI tool, which is a Linux command line program that you can run to send settings to IPMI on the board. Some people have figured out a way of sending raw fan speed controls to IPMI. However, they do it by zone. And again, as far as I can tell, this board, an X9DRD IF, has one zone, and I can't get any of the commands I can find online to work for it. So I haven't been able to set a manual fan speed on here. If I could figure out how to do that, if one of you knows how to do that on an X9DRD IF, please leave a comment, because that might change how I can use this server. As it is now, it's gonna have to go back in the server closet because it's just too loud at 75%, and there's nothing in between that I can use. So it's gonna have to be that. Now, when I'm saying that it's slightly overheated, when I run it at 30% on standard, the hard drives get to 35 to 40 C, which is like, right there at that point where you don't really want them to be, but not too hot. And then the CPUs are between 40 and 45 C, I would say. It's a bigger spread because there's 16 cores and high variability, but around 40 to 45, which is... I've had Haswell chips that idled at that speed, but this can be lower. So it's just annoying. The GPU just rock solid. I just checked the temps. It was at 38C at 30%. It's got its own fans. It manages its own temperatures. It's doing whatever it needs to keep cool. So it's not a problem. It's just those, really the hard drives that I don't want running too hot, because this is primarily a storage server and I don't want to lose data. So yeah, fans are complicated. So the fans were a mixed bag in the end, but the motherboard swap has been undeniably better since all of the IPMI features are now working. The last thing I wanted to check out was getting my editing software reinstalled and running on the server, which actually went smoother than I'd ever experienced before on Linux, which was also a little annoying because I've been having a bug with Linux Resolve on my desktop that causes it to freeze the UI when I do some things, and now I know that's some sort of hardware incompatibility that I'm going to have to get help from Blackmagic with. But for the first time in a long time now, I can use my server for remote rendering again now that it's updated to Resolve 17. That new version also introduced a completely new proxy feature that works even better with how I built my server. So this has been a huge improvement in my editing setup overall. With that, there are only a few more loose ends I need to cover. So, final thoughts on the server upgrades. The motherboard replacement went absolutely perfectly. I have all IPMI features. It has a functional VGA output. The VGA remote capture for the KVM over the web interface works perfectly. It's just my fault that I have another GPU in there, and I'll eventually figure out the Xorg configuration files to use this as I want. So that's just a time thing. The fan upgrade, I mean, again, I had to replace the fans because the one was bad, so it just was a requirement. I didn't have to spend as much as I did on full-on Noctuas that were super quiet, only to find that they weren't as quiet as I'd hoped. So I'm going to call that one a bit of a wash, because I needed new fans, and these are quieter. Matter of fact, let's go ahead and do a comparison between the original fans that were, I don't actually know what they were set to. I'm going to assume standard. And then these fans in both standard and full, so you can see what the volumes are like, because even at its loudest here, it's still much quieter than it was before. So, yeah, even though it's not totally silent and it's not going to be able to be next to my desk while I'm editing, as nice as that would be, because then it would be really short cable runs and everything would just be a lot easier to work with. And then I would have easy access to the GUI. It's going to be fine in the server closet, and it's going to be way quieter than it was before. You may not even have to like close the doors and all this stuff. I have like foam padding in front of the doors, try and make it as quiet as possible. I can probably reduce a lot of that down now, so that is going to be nice, but it's not quiet enough to keep around where people are all the time. All right. Well, if you enjoyed this video, you may want to subscribe. I don't know where the next server video is going to be because it's kind of done now, but I will eventually be doing a full Linux editing workflow video. I just have to get that one hanging problem fixed with Resolve, which is going to require installing CentOS and getting official Blackmagic support, so that's going to be fun. But once that's done, there'll be a video on that. If you want to support the channel, I am on Patreon. But for now, that is it, and I will see you next time.